So the last video I made about tutoring kind of blew up, and with that you guys asked a lot of burning questions, so we're just going to jump right into what they are. The first one is, where do I get my students? I've kind of explained this already, but I'll give you guys a little bit more detail and hopefully also some advice on how you can also get students as well. So I get my students, as I've mentioned, from word of mouth. I started off with teaching my brother and his friends, and then it literally spread from there. So how kind of I facilitated that process was very simple on my part. All I really did was reach out to the group chats I was already in, be it for my clubs that I was in or any like subjects or any classes, and was like, hey, does anyone have like a younger sibling? I'm gonna teach English around like this timing for like this price, maybe like once a week. Would anyone be interested? Now, that sounds really easy and my success from there seems almost improbable, but you really have to take that first step, because what I've learned from personal experience is that the most difficult thing to do when you're tutoring is kind of to have thick skin. You need like a degree of confidence in yourself to be able to ask like, hey, I want to teach, do you have any recommendations for that? A common question or comment I get in my last video was, I'm not smart enough to do this, or I'm not confident enough to do this, and I think that's completely valid if that's the way you feel, but I do just want to add on to the fact that, first of all, you really don't have to be like very good in a subject to teach it, but you do have to be good. So like, as I've said, that is a kind of a requirement because you are selling, your expertise, your knowledge, your way of thinking, your way of explanation. You do have to have like a thorough understanding of that subject. But that being said, it doesn't mean that you need to be in like the top 1% of that subject to be good, right? I mean, common sense, you don't have to be like the best at math in your school to be able to teach math. And oftentimes the people you teach end up becoming better than you in some subjects in the future. So very much, one, it's going to depend on the age range, right? For example, I teach high schoolers, so it is kind of important for me to have a very solid grasp on the information. But for example, if you want to teach like 4th graders or 5th graders, or for example, you want to be a Japanese tutor and Japanese is not their first language and it's you don't really need to be that proficient in Japanese to be able to teach it. You see what I'm saying? So that part is, I think, kind of resolves like the intelligence portion. And I don't think that just because you're smart you can tutor, and just because you tutor you can smart. I don't think that's a logical syllogism that works. But the confidence thing is something that I want to talk a little bit more about. And I think for me, I really benefited off of the fact that I don't get stage fright. No matter in theater or in front of a camera or with my students, I just speak to them as I would normally to other people, if not a little bit more formally. But as you'll see in my like sample teaching portion later on, that I do speak to my students as a human being as possible, because I'm a tutor, not their subject teacher. And I want to make that distinction very clear. I want them to think of me as something as a mentor, as someone they can talk to about what they legitimately don't understand in the subject, not someone they have to like put up walls to who will grade them on their behavior, because that's not what I'm here for, right? I'm here to improve your grade, not to actually grade you. All right, so that's to clear it up. So I mainly teach on Zoom. Is this main software I use because everyone knows how to use it now, and even before the pandemic hit, I've been using Zoom. One reason is because it's not banned in China, unlike Google Meets, so that's great. Now, I've heard a lot of people ask me like, oh, what platforms do you use to find students? And then subsequently, a lot of people are asking me, I actually got a message saying, hey, I'll pay you commission, can you introduce me to your students? I can't do that. One is because I don't know you, and therefore I don't trust you. Even if you send me your resume, which surprisingly enough some people did, that's not enough for me to judge, because as I've mentioned, tutoring is not really just about what you're good at, it's also about your personality, how you teach, your familiarity, and it's about that like sense of trust that you build up with your students. So that's why I can't really like share my network of students, but that's why I think it's completely possible for you to build your own. But that being said, you have to be a little bit thick-skinned, right? You have to reach out to your friends, you have to reach out to your community, you have to be kind of like that person advertising for a little bit until you have a few students that you're comfortable with, and then you just really organically go from there. However, say for whatever reason that you can't do that. If you don't want to do that, maybe think about why you don't want to do that, and then think about whether tutoring is the job for you. But if you find yourself unable to do this, I recommend, as I said in the last video, going on Fiverr, and I'll list a couple other websites here. Now, the pros of these websites is that it's very accessible, anyone can sign up for a shop, and anyone can hire you. The con is that you're often not paid a lot, and you often have to work more hours to get yourself established, become a level 1 seller, level 2 seller, before you can actually get recognized and start upping your prices. But I personally think that that journey very much mirrors what it's actually like to tutor in real life, if not a little bit easier. And the reasoning is this. Right now, since everyone is so used to remote learning, starting a Fiverr shop is integrating into a system that people are already used to, right? Like when I was teaching, there was a time period where my students kind of had to get used to online learning because all of learning was in person. So that was a barrier that I had to overcome. But now that's no longer a barrier, and so I actually think it's a pretty good idea to set up a Fiverr shop. Now, if you think setting up a Fiverr shop trying to get clients, that seems too high of a barrier, I will assure you that doing it in person is somewhat similar. Speaking of software, another really cool thing you can do is to create your own website. Now, I haven't done this myself just yet because I am been very lazy and I haven't done this, but honestly I should, because it'll kind of showcase what I'm doing and it's really easy to attract students. And if you're starting out by yourself, having a really cool website is an easy way to kind of attract people. But the biggest problem I find with websites is that the ones that are easy to build, some names, insert some names here that I cannot say, are kind of often more expensive, right? They cost up to like what, $10 to $15 a month, and even if that doesn't sound like too much money to me, it's just I wouldn't pay that for a website. So I'd like to introduce you guys to today's sponsor, 𝐭𝐢𝐦𝐞𝐬𝐭. Now, 𝐭𝐢𝐦𝐞𝐬𝐭 is a really cool no-code website builder, and it costs less than $3 a month. That's one of the reasons why I decided to work with them, and it's because of the really cheap price, the fact that it's really beautiful, it's easy to use, and they have 24/7 customer support, which is always great when I'm running into tech stuff and I don't personally code very well in HTML or CSS, so having a no-code website builder that looks as pretty as some other websites that are out there, I think is really cool. So if you guys are interested, use my code Chloe for 3 months off, or you can click the link below in my description as well. Alright, back to the video. Thank you for watching the ad break. One of the most common questions I got in my last video is how am I paid so much money? And there are a lot of similar comments such as like my mother or my friend or whoever is a full-time teacher and she doesn't make as much money as you do, etc, etc. Now, I have 3 points that I just kind of want to like open up the conversation a little bit. First one is something I've already addressed. I teach kids in Shanghai, as some of the comments in my last session have pointed out who are also tutors for kids in Shanghai. The education industry in Shanghai is just much more highly priced than those in other countries, maybe with the exception of some other countries like South Korea. I'm not too sure about that, don't quote me on that, but I think so. So because of that baseline is already higher, it's not really because of anything I'm doing, but it just happens to be that I went to school in Shanghai, I grew up in Shanghai, and therefore this was the community I had access to. Some barriers just can't be crossed. If you have no access to students in Shanghai or like in China, and you want that, it's going to be astronomically difficult for you to do that. And it sounds really upsetting, but that's just kind of how it is. There are ways you can overcome it, such as through online platforms or agencies, but as I mentioned, it's always a bit of a gamble, right? They might be scamming you for your money. You often get taken, I think, like 50% of your cut. The students often are also scammed, or worse, the students are not aware of what they're buying into, etc, etc. There are a lot of problems with these like cross-national connecting students to you agencies. And the reason is because I've actually been approached by a few who tried to poach me, and I was just like, no, after looking at their practices. But that's my 2 cents on that. And so the first thing is just, right, the country, location, timing, I really just got lucky. The second one, however, I want to point out is competitive advantage. People are paying me not simply to teach them English literature, but to teach them English literature to get their grades up, to get their classes like increased, right? So as I mentioned, by the tier system of my school, it's imperative for students to go up by a grade, right? It's extremely competitive in that sense, and therefore, because I graduated from that high school, I not only know English literature well, but I know how this high school is going to grade you. For example, a student can come to me and be like, oh, hi, I got this assessment in my this class, and my this teacher said this, and I'll be like, oh, I had that teacher, or I know someone who had that teacher. Here are some tips on how to tackle this teacher, or here are some tips on how to tackle this assignment, or oh, this is my assignment that I did when I was in 7th grade. Let me send it to you because it's the same assignment. Or I've read this book before. Let me give you my old notes, right? They're paying me for that competitive advantage that I also provide them. So as my clientele has kind of expanded and my students have expanded, I've also had to read a lot more stuff. But as a result, it's really important for me to keep up with what's going on in my high school, to other high schools in Shanghai, even just like around, to kind of know what's going on so I can devise a curriculum for them. But that is also what they're paying me for. It's not simply just English tutoring. I mean, it is, but it's also a little bit more because it's more specialized. So that partially, I think, justifies the higher price tag, especially if you put it into perspective with the first point. And the last point is I've been doing this for 2.5 years to 3 years. And so this is like, I am not entry level in this industry at all, right? I'm a little higher than that, I would say. So please don't treat this as an entry salary that you can get once you start tutoring. As a college student, it's probably not, but if you put in the amount of effort, amount of time, with a little bit of luck, it might be something that you can do full time. I definitely don't recommend doing it full-time, and I won't be doing it myself just because I love teaching, but I also want to use my college degree to do something. So I'm a little bit torn on that, but I'll let you guys know where I lie on that. Alright, the next one is how to devise a lesson plan and how I structure my classes. So everything from now on is going to be more like tutoring related. Everything before is kind of just like logistics. So if you're not interested in that anymore, feel free to click out of the video or leave me a comment below. But let's get on into the teaching material. So the first thing I do is I think about what stage in my overall like timeline for these students, what stage are they on? So usually my students are split into 3 stages. The first one is kind of like beginner level, where either they don't really know the grammar that well of this like text or just like the language or literature, because it differs, right? For example, being able to speak English well doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at writing it in a literary way well, and being able to write well doesn't mean that you can come up with like really critical, important like literary analyses, ideas well on your own. They're like different levels of difficulty, okay? So the beginner section is kind of, can they comprehend what I'm saying? Can they put together cohesive sentences that are, sophisticated or shortened? Do they have like control over language? That's the beginner portion. Then we move on to the next phase, which is developing your own style of writing and developing your own ideas. This one's a little bit harder just because I think that it requires a lot of time on my part, because I actually need to invest time into each student, take a look at what their style is, what their style of learning, and as well as what their style of writing is. So here I always ask for people's past writings, your school assignments, anything like that for me to look over, and then I'll write down a couple notes on, I think you need to work on this to improve your style, or I think that this is a good area that you can look more into. Stuff like that. And then the final one is when we do all the logistics, putting it all together, that's really painful part, where usually I give them say like an hour and a half to write me a 3-page essay. That's usually what the bar mark is, and if you've done IB, this probably sounds very similar to paper 1 because it usually is paper 1, but basically it's IB paper 1, where I give them an unseen poem or an unseen text or a novel or part of a novel or something or a short story, and say, hi, write me an essay in 40 minutes. Like write me a 5-paragraph essay in 40 minutes. Or 50 minutes. If you can do that, then you're solid. And if you're done with that, if you want to graduate, you can. I'll graduate you. That's perfectly fine. I'm not offended. I'm really happy that you've improved and gone along all of this stuff. However, if you want to learn more about one of my most popular units is literary Marxism. Very cool. My personal favorite, postmodernist literature. Very cool. I'll put some examples here on the screen. But all of this is stuff that I'm really passionate about, and therefore is things that I can teach. But it doesn't really have anything to do with what they learn at school, which is why I give them the option of like, hey, you can graduate if you like. Like, you don't have to keep taking this class if you don't want to. Now that we kind of went over the long-term lesson plan, I want to go into how I structure each individual lesson. So like going into each lesson, what do I need? What do I need in front of me? So I teach via my iPad just because I can screen share, and I use GoodNotes usually to do that because I can draw on the screen, or I just use Zoom's inbuilt whiteboard function, or I import a screenshot into Zoom and then I can draw on that screenshot. I use that probably the most often, and here's why. When I start off my class, I start off with a little recap. I'm like, hey, last class we did this. So usually I have my last class notes open. Hi, last class we did this. The assigned homework was this. Please send in your homework if you haven't already. If you sent in your homework already, then I will like open up their homework and then review it in front of the class. This process probably takes 15 to 20 minutes. If not a little bit more, if they have more questions on their homework. And then for the next 20-25 minutes-ish, I go on into what we're doing today. Usually it's some sort of annotation or a specific skill I'm teaching them. For example, I spent a full 2 hours the other day teaching them how to draw like critical observations from literature. So for example, if you look at a text like this, and I ask you what literary devices are used, you can probably answer that decently easily, right? Hopefully, if you know what they are, you can identify them. But from then on, what is the impact, influence, what like effect do these literary devices have on the overall text, right? So that's a more complicated question because you need to identify the tone, you need to identify what the speaker does. For example, anaphora is repetition, right? Sure, it repeats, and then some students will say, oh, it repeats, therefore this tone is emphasized, but that doesn't actually make sense. So I ask them to think about it a little more, and then ultimately the conclusion we'll get to is anaphora, aka the repetition of language, and with that repetition, it is an appeal to your emotions, aka an appeal to pathos, and that is a persuasive technique, and then you can link it back to the overall tone of the speech, and then you have an assertion that you can use. So that's what I mean by like a specific skill. In this case, it's turning an observation into an analysis. So that's like one small example. So yeah, that's how I go into each individual class. I usually spend the last 5-ish minutes confirming next week's timing, as well as answering any questions, or if anyone wants to change their schedule, they can let me know during then. For example, now is finals week, so I actually did not have any tuition classes the last weekend because everyone was reviewing for their finals, and the weekend before, I've already done my best to help them review for their English finals, so now they need to focus on their other stuff. So it's very flexible, and that's one of the things I'm really thankful for. Alright, and the last part of this video is I wanted to go over a little bit of like a teaching sample. I'm not super sure if you guys would be like very interested in this, but essentially I thought I would just talk to the camera as if I were teaching to kind of give you guys a sense of what it looks like. Okay, well, here we go. Alright, so this is usually the intro portion. Okay, I'm not going to look at the camera because this is very odd. I'm just going to look at this general area. But okay. Hey everyone, hope you guys had like a good week last week. I know the last thing that we tackled on was A Wrinkle in Time, and then for some of you it was Inherit the Wind. What did your teacher talk about in class? Okay, that being said, we covered Drummond's analysis last time, as well as how he kind of used language to trick Brady, talk about Brady using these different persuasion techniques on the witness stand. For that specific scene, do we have any questions, or do you have any things that your teacher has emphasized on? Alright, if not, then today we're going to delve into this specific portion. So first we're going to talk about this line here, and we're going to analyze together how this contributes to the overall tone. So we're going to identify what the overall tone is, right? What's the tone? Good. Okay, now give me a little bit more, right? We've done this before. How do we induce this tone using X persuasive technique? Okay, that makes sense, but how about regarding this line? Right? So now we know how to look at it from a larger perspective. We know how to do it over these multiple lines of dialogue. How about this one particular line and how this contributes to the overall function of this text? What do we think? Okay, this will be like the discussion section of one of my classes where we've already discussed something, I already taught them something, and now I want to hear them say it and use it. That was so awkward talking to myself. But yeah, that's basically it. And I hope this video was useful in answering some of your questions. I really just wanted to say thank you. I didn't want to do that at the start of the video because I know sometimes you guys just want quick answers to questions. So here, hopefully this is that channel. But I cannot believe that that singular video has literally like quintupled my number of subscribers, and I'm really thankful. I have no idea why the YouTube algorithm picked up that video, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the fact that everyone wants to learn about how other people make money, and 2, I think I've been uploading decently frequently before that, so maybe the algorithm gods just looked upon me in favor. But regardless of the reason, you guys are the ones that made it happen, and thank you so much. As you can see, I'm in a different location right now because I've moved away from my gorgeous, gorgeous apartment in downtown for practical reasons, because I do want to be in Hyde Park for the summer to do classes, and also because in fall quarter, UChicago is going to be in person again, which is super exciting. So I want to be in Hyde Park for that. But yeah, there's going to be some home stuff coming soon, and my next video is going to be an apartment hunting vlog, and I hope you guys enjoy. Bye!